capitalism is recent. It's only 200 years old, 300 years old, and this idea that there's an inevitability to this, as if from the dawn of time, like shareholders were roaming the earth. It's just not true. It's like, again, like the water system, like it isn't inevitable that our water systems are owned by huge corporations and that are pumping shit into our rivers. That happened because humans made decisions like not that long ago, and those decisions they're at least worth questioning. I'm not going to say we should reverse them, but we should question them. And it's the same with capitalism. Is this the best thing that we should be doing?
You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast with me, Dan Burgess. The story of Spaceship Earth is simple. We live on a life-giving rock called Earth, hurtling through space. Like a spaceship, we have a finite amount of supplies with an intelligent operating system called nature, which keeps everything replenished as long as we all respect it and participate wisely. In this podcast, I'm in conversation with folk involved in regenerating life, shifting consciousness and reimagining how we can live more beautifully and peacefully. I talk with artists, writers, activists, designers, adventurers, healers, farmers, creative mavericks, and more. Their stories invite us to participate in the co-creation of life-sustaining cultures, in service to life, becoming crew on Spaceship Earth. Greetings, Earthling. Dan here. Welcome to the Spaceship Earth podcast. Thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, if this is a first visit, welcome aboard. And if you are returning, welcome back. Thank you for being here. It's much appreciated. Thanks to all of those who have activated the paid subscription on Substack. Just want to say that a few of you have since the last episode. Please keep it coming. If you're sort of thinking, maybe, we're a long way off covering even a quarter of the cost of producing these episodes. It works out at about £7 a month. So that's about the cost of a pint of beer in the UK. So a pint of podcast a month actually gets you 2 episodes a month and some writing on Substack and updates on community gatherings and other marvellous things we've got cooking. So if you'd like to buy a pint of podcast every month, we'd be most grateful. And you are helping these conversations happen, these stories emerge and seed themselves around our beautiful planet. And who knows what happens within these conversations. So that's the pitch over. On to this episode. Something a little bit different this week from the deeper, maybe kind of more spiritual dive we've been on in the last 3 episodes. In this episode, I'm in conversation with Matt Barr, who is host of the amazing adventure sports podcast, Looking Sideways. If you don't know Looking Sideways, I hope you will check it out after this episode. Matt has released nearly 250 episodes on his podcast over the last 7 years. It's been one of a handful of go-to podcasts for me that has definitely inspired and encouraged the Spaceship Earth podcast. He's also done some fascinating collaborations on the back of his podcast, including a whole series of episodes with Patagonia called Type 2, exploring kind of outdoor adventure sports meets activism and social change. And I guess I've always been fascinated by how outdoor sports, adventure sports, has this kind of obvious relationship with our living earth, and therefore this kind of extraordinary potential for connection, for protection and stewarding, I guess, of life on this earth that exists within these communities. I'm a lifelong trail runner. I've been a keen surfer for nearly 20 years, and both of those pursuits have, I guess, kept my kind of awe for the earth very much alive, and I would say my humility as a simple little human being, fairly irrelevant little human being, on this kind of epic, immense, complex, intelligent, more than human planet. It's kept my humility in check. You know, running through thick mud, dark, cold and rain, and being slammed by powerful waves and, pulled out by rip currents. It's all very good for your kind of humility, I find, for sort of, just keeping that sense of, the earth, we're here on this big, more than human planet, and I'm just this little being. So I've always been drawn to some of these pursuits for those reasons, obviously because they're really awesome as well, but there's something about the edge that I think is very healthy. It helps to have a more humble relationship with the earth. So over the years, I have really appreciated how Matt digs into really difficult tensions that we are facing. Many of the things that I explore here on the Spaceship Earth podcast, Matt explores on Looking Sideways, but he's doing it through the lens of action sports and some amazing humans that he brings on and hosts and digs into their stories. But I mean, he's covered so many things, from climate and ecological breakdown, structural racism, gender rights, oppressive colonial structures. Pretty much everything that we're sort of facing into is covered through Matt's podcast. He, I feel, is creating spaces to explore the complexities, the nuance, the difficult things we must all learn to begin to step into and not have answers for and not be right. The uncomfortable conversations that I feel we must learn rapidly to welcome if we're to find ways through these crazy times into more beautiful, peaceful, cooperative ways of being. Podcasting can be an extraordinary medium for this, for learning and unlearning, which is what keeps me going, to be fair, with this podcast. And definitely through this conversation is something that drives Matt to continue with his. So the conversation explores some of that, the need for more spaces to help us unstuck ourselves, to move through the binariness of our culture, to let go of the divisiveness, which is often based on just really poor information and understanding of the context that we are in as modern humans, especially when it comes to our relationship with a complex living planet. We also speak a lot, actually, to the elephant in the room when it comes to climate, ecology, politics, inequality, and all the other meta-crises. The spell of capitalism. Our collective inability to imagine anything different, and the impacts of a deeply commoditized and monetized culture on our, I'd say, personal agency and sense of responsibility, particularly, I would say, the entitlement and privilege that many of us in westernized cultures have been taught to expect, and how that impacts our participation in these unravelling times, of what is ours to do in these extraordinary times. Anyway, I hope you enjoy this episode. Do check out Looking Sideways, and look out for Matt's forthcoming 3-part documentary with Patagonia called The Announcement, which we speak to quite a bit in this episode. So, let's cut to it. This is the Spaceship Earth podcast in conversation with Matt Barr. Enjoy.
You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast with my dad, Dan Burgess.
Right, Matt,
Hello.
welcome
Hello.
to the Spaceship Earth podcast.
The flight deck. Yeah, love it. Love this space. This is Shed Goals. I mean, it's more of a studio, isn't it? But you've got it set up really nicely as well. Love the books.
Yeah.
Always fascinated by people's bookshelves. This is quite a nice thing, isn't it, to have a little nosy?
Yeah. There's some fairly mind expanding material on those shelves.
Can you still read?
Well, do you know what? When I am able to let go of the tech, I can read.
Same.
You know? So
it's funny, when I was a kid, I could read through anything. You know, I could like be in the pub and I could read, or I could have music. I can't really read. I need to kind of have silence now and no distractions, unless it's like a really compelling, page turner. But I have to work much harder at reading these days.
There's a lot of I've always got a lot of noise in my head, but of late I find it. Yeah, I'm finding the ability to sort of just drop into a book.
Yeah.
Definitely harder. We went away end of last year with the kids, and part of the deal was we were going to we went to Salt and Surf in Sri Lanka.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Ed.
Yes, right. Yeah. So we went out there, care of my dear departed father's generosity, and part of the deal was we're going to go on a surf yoga retreat, but we're going to have a digital detox. Like, everyone has to. I'm going to take everyone's phones,
right?
And obviously that was kind of hotly debated, particularly by my eldest daughter. But everyone did it, and it was absolutely stunning. And I think she got through 3 books in a week.
Right.
We all did, actually. And I think that's the thing. It's just, it's for me, definitely the always on tech is definitely erodes my ability to.
Yeah, defo.
To move into stuff.
Yeah. It's hard, isn't it? Because it's your work as well.
Yeah.
And you're just required to be on screens constantly.
Yeah.
And especially, something like the podcast as well that you do and that I do, where there's a really nice community element to it, which I really enjoy. But also that means you're essentially spending a lot of time with a bit of an online life, really.
Yeah.
Which I don't mind, but I think it's like a balance, isn't it? Especially when do we count as Gen X?
What does that mean?
So born in the analog era, and then dying in the AI era.
So we have kind of felt grounded experience of both analog life and digital life.
Up until pretty late as well.
Yeah,
it's only like the last 20 years, isn't it?
Right,
that it's really become. Yeah, it was you had the internet and you had access to information. On an unprecedented scale. But you obviously didn't carry around an addictive little crack device with you the whole time. I think the reading thing is the reason I bring it up in that context, is because that's a bit of a classic example, isn't it? For us of our generation who have had to adapt essentially, like to the way that the way that we receive information, the way that we communicate, and the way that we kind of experience the things that perhaps we took for granted, like for most of our lives, like reading.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, exactly. It's such a big thing, this stuff. But I'm curious, like, in the world that Looking Sideways sits within, the networks you're in, and how would you describe the vibes on Spaceship Earth right now?
I think people are struggling, aren't they? Like on many levels. There's not a lot of light out there right now, really. And that, we were talking about this, weren't we, in the context of of our generation. There was a feeling of positivity, I think, at the end of the 90s, and there was a feeling that the future's going to be quite bright from this point, and that's not how it's turned out at all. So I feel that, I think that's a surprise to people, isn't it? If you've been paying attention. Yeah, I think to be in 2024 and it to be demonstrably we all have a worse standard of living, and like the country clearly, I mean, we're talking about the UK specifically, obviously, like to really run properly, you know, completely venal people in charge appear to be motivated in self-interest. You kind of thought that had all been left behind a little bit, don't you? But then I think people are equally culpable in not, again, asking tough enough questions, really. So yeah, I think there's work to do.
God, yes, work to be done. It feels, you know, as part of the reason I wanted to invite you onto the podcast for many reasons, but first I remember, like, I don't know when you started your pod, because I started in 2018 and you were
started in 2017.
Right, there you go.
Yeah, because it's about it was around now, like it's pretty much bang on 7 years ago.
I think your episodes, even your early episodes, I mean, I was just going today, you've done nearly 250 odd episodes.
Yeah,
it's a lot,
it's a lot, isn't it?
It's a lot.
Yeah,
you know.
Hello friends, how's it going? Matt here, and you are listening to the Looking Sideways Action Sports podcast, the show where I look at life through the lens of surfing, skateboarding, snowboarding and other related endeavours. Thank you for tuning into this episode and I hope you enjoy it.
But I remember, you know, I was trying to figure out like what drew me into your podcast, and I was thinking about this long form stuff, and even just thinking now how just what we're speaking to about getting into books, even that feels eroded somewhat as well, the ability to sort of dive into a longer form conversation. At least in my head that's feeling more complicated for folks. I don't know, maybe I'm generalizing here.
Maybe, yeah, as in if you're faced with a 3-hour, for example, podcast conversation, like whether people, I mean, I guess that is a thing.
That ability to sort of, I guess, the attention, this kind of ability to sort of give our attention to things, or to one thing feels. But someone said to me recently, "Oh, you know, if you're putting out an episode, sort of hour and 10 minutes, you're asking someone to give you an hour and 10 minutes of their time." You know? And I thought, oh, that's interesting. Or it could be like I'm giving them something as well to sit with.
That's the sort of classic. That's so funny, that, isn't it? That's like. Well, but that's, you know, that attitude is real, though, isn't it? Because ultimately, like, there is just not an original point, but there is a lot of choice out there, isn't there? And it is, you do have to choose those things quite carefully these days, don't you? I mean, when I started it, like, I was very, like, I just really wanted a pretty selfish, bloody-minded creative outlet. Really, that's why I started it. And as a journalist who's been working journalist for 30 years now, pretty much. And again, like, you know, that career sort of straddled the two eras, if you like. You know, when I started out, it was literally, I mean, I used to handwrite my first articles, you know, because I didn't have the internet. And then over those years, obviously, that landscape shifted to the point where it's actually quite hard to get commissioned to talk about the things that I wanted to talk about. I was lucky enough to still get commissioned, but it was all very squeezed into quite a formulaic box, really, in terms of like, well, people only want to listen to this, their attention spans are really short, you have to present information in this way, blah blah blah. You know, we can all recognise that in the way media presents things now, and I just didn't really buy it. I just was a bit like, okay, fair enough, like, but if I'm going to do this, then I'd like to do something where I completely ignore all that received wisdom and just do something that is you know, the old NME gag. We do it for ourselves, and if anyone listens to it, it's a bonus kind of thing. It was a bit of an idea behind that, and yeah, luckily enough, people seem to really like it. So that was obviously really encouraging, and for me to keep going down that path, which is kind of what I've done all along, really. Now,
I guess I think I connected into the podcast because in the early days as well, there were certain guests that you were bringing in that I had a real interest in through their kind of like blend of not just sort of action sports, but their level of either kind of activism or their connection to something a bit bigger that was sort of driving, coming through. You know, I'm thinking of, you know, probably like Eski Britain,
Eski,
Fergal and Smith, and you know, and those that all had that sort of, you know, that part of who they are was sort of way more than just the board and the And so I think I was really drawn to the conversations you were having, that there was always this deeper exploration going on.
Yeah.
I'd listen to everything and I'd learn, it would actually, you go, well, there's some surfer on here, but actually the conversation was really, there was elements of surf, but there's always some just really fascinating story. Was that always the idea, or is it just how you found the energy of how you started with this?
Well, I just always have thought that there is good a vehicle, as in surfing, skateboarding, snowboarding, through which to explore these things as anything, really. Like they're all, look at this room, like it's clearly a massive part of your life, surfing, isn't it? In the same way that all these really interesting books that you've got here are, and all the things, they're an expression of what you're interested in, aren't they? And they're probably like as important in different ways. So again, I just never really bought the idea that it needed to be dumb. Yeah. If it was gonna be about that.
And there's plenty of that around, I guess, as well.
Well, there's plenty. Well, and dumb's probably a bit of a dickish word to use, but like, if it's, there's plenty of that. There's plenty of like personalities. There's plenty of like, let's valorize these people for their feats, and there's a bit of that in what I do, because obviously,
amazing people.
I'm a fan.
Yeah.
But equally, it's not just that, is it? For me anyway, like growing up doing these activities, the actual activity, the snowboarding bit, the surfing bit, is just one part of the experience that comes with it, and it has shaped my life completely. Like I've got a career out of it, I've got my entire friendship group out of it, I've got all my life experiences out of it, out of these things that I've been kind of really, particularly surfing and snowboarding. The actual riding the board part is only one bit of it. So I kind of wanted to reflect that with the podcast.
Yeah, gosh. And I think the action sports that you cover is everything that's out there, but the actual stories that you start to explore with your guests are quite extraordinary, actually, in terms of like the scope of how they're reflecting so many of the kind of issues and challenges that in our cultures we're coming up against every day.
Yeah.
And I think that's what, for me, I've always found interesting, and also I feel quite vital. I think I sort of look for kind of, let's call it media, although it's such a different thing running a podcast. it's I wish the economics and all that, but I look for that in story of trying to understand how we can learn about the shit we're constantly coming up against through people that are in some ways experiencing the world differently, or at least on face value of what they do, but actually under the skin can share a lot that can be really it can really open up space. So I sense that's a lot of what you do and have been doing. You are often responding to things. You look at even just, I look back, I remember when, we can get into all the different sort of, I guess, the projects that have come out of Looking Sideways and the collaborations you've done and stuff. But quite often I see that there's a kind of big thing that kind of happens out in our world. I can think of like, when BLM massively blew up again, because of the where was that, 2020? And how you kind of responded quite a lot to that in terms of the guests that you were having these conversations around, racism within these in these areas of action sport and diversity and representation. And you've spoken to kind of gender rights. You've spoken to, obviously loads of stuff around climate and ecological issues, and I think, what was your last episode last week was with the chat behind, Gaza Surf Club, right? So, and what you're doing, I often feel for these conversations, is you're helping people understand more depth and complexity and nuance that sits around these problems. Yeah, well, it's really nice to hear you say that, because that is what I'm trying to do, basically, and I think the Gaza one's actually a really good example. Like I spoke a little bit about this at the end of the episode. I'm not gonna say I got loads of shit, because who cares? Like, no one fucking doesn't matter what shit I get on Instagram. But I definitely got criticised because I wasn't
on my stories ranting for whatever side you might be on in that debate. And I kind of found that quite interesting, really, because I was a bit like, well, what's that actually going to achieve, really? And it is a very, in my view, it is a very complicated thing that is worth trying to understand more, contextualize more effectively. And then that's kind of redolent of the whole social media thing as well, isn't it? Because ultimately, it's really hard, whatever the issue these days, to not instantly leap to some kind of binary position, isn't it? Because that's
how the whole thing's structured, really.
It's how the whole thing's structured, and it's really hard not to do it. It's really hard not to, we were just talking earlier about having a digital life and having to be online as part of what we do for work and as a community and all that stuff. And so if you're going to engage in that, to try and separate yourself from that is really hard. And but I kind of think increasingly essential. So that is really what it's about. With the Gaza Surf episode in particular, I really thought a long time about who cares about me doing a fucking episode about this? But at the same time, is there a way of looking at this from a slightly more considered remove, really? Where it's not just about, this is my opinion, if you don't like it, then you're wrong, which tends to be, how things devolve. These, things really do boil down to that quite quickly. I one of the rare interactions I had about Gaza, online, because I haven't really posted about it and I tend not to get involved in it. 2 comments in, I'm a genocide apologist, and it's just wow, that that's pretty quick to get there. So I kind of, I'm interested in understanding things more, and I guess it's arrogant to say make people think about things a bit more deeply. That'd be an incredibly privileged and arrogant thing to say, but there is a little bit of an element of that, to be honest. I mean, the final thing I'll say as well, one of the things I've been thinking a lot about from doing these conversations is, I guess, what you might call the edge, the pace of the debate. These topics you just listed, climate change, Black Lives Matter, for that whole conversation, gender issues, these conversations are taking place constantly, and there are people who are very, very involved in those conversations. Look at climate, who you probably don't know about, and that, as a result, those conversations, that they're going ahead at a pace that you might not be aware of. And when people just sort of log into Instagram and think, oh, I'm going to post about climate change today, quite often, it's quite clear that people don't have a clue about the reality of where that debate actually is, and you end up getting quite a lot of quite hackneyed points of view which don't really add that much value to the conversation. And I think that's one area where action sports is pretty far behind, really, where people just fire in on things that they've got absolutely no idea about the reality of what's going on. So that was one of the reasons with the Gaza thing. I thought, what, I'm just going to get somebody on the show who is incredibly clued up, so that we can try and look at where is the pace of the debate on this? What are people who work there? I mean, this guy works in Gaza. What is he saying about this? What's his observations about what's going on the ground?
When I first went into Gaza to start the surf club project, there was no one there. There was no gas, and there was no meat, and there was, it was a full embargo because Hamas had just taken over. So,
and the same with the climate stuff. If you're just going to reflexively call someone a hypocrite, you are kind of revealing that you're not really abreast of what's going on in that conversation right now. And if you're going to contribute to that conversation, it might behove you to get a little bit more up to speed. That's kind of the premise of it, really.
It's funny, as you were speaking about even about that, speaking to privilege. I mean, I was on had a episode last week which had a mad technical glitch afterwards. I was telling you about. But
I feel your pain.
I know, mate. It's because it was such a beautiful conversation with someone that I respect so highly. But my friend Imi Kerr up in Birmingham.
Oh, I've interviewed Imi about 2 months ago.
Oh, there you go.
She's incredible.
Yeah. So she's someone we've been sort of, following each other's work for a long, long time. And,
what a coincidence.
So anyway, but Imi was saying basically that, look, if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably in the 1% of the most privileged people on the planet anyway.
Yeah.
Right? So do something with it. Like her view is like, everyone is needed right now. And if you have the ability to listen to podcast content, then listen to stuff that's going to challenge you a bit and open you up a bit, because, again, in her view, the majority of people on this earth are living in really fucking shitty times.
Yeah.
Right. The majority.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like we need to understand different perspectives of what these realities look like. And if you can do that through, like you say, through the lens of action sports, then, for me, this is kind of like, this year, this whole idea of I'm trying to sort of, how do we encourage more of this exploration? Because also it's I would say it's actually quite beautiful exploration as well. As much as it's challenging and divisive and whatever, it's kind of like, I feel we're in this time of we either begin to open up, and we either begin to sort of grow our humility to recognise that we don't know that much.
Yeah. And be prepared to be challenged.
Right.
One of the interesting things about the Gaza episode was the number of people that shared it, obviously without listening to it. Because, if you look at the Gaza Surf Club, right, that, like, if you're like me and you, very much of the left, we have, and a lot of our peers are, and a lot of the online circles that we move in are of the left, So the Gaza Surf Club has been very comprehensively shared over the last 6 months, Yeah. And it has become a bit of a shorthand for, like, this, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, people are sharing that, but it's not. I think if you've just looked at that on a surface level, that episode would not be what you were expecting, because it's not just like Israel is bad and this is a genocide, and it's much. His position is much more nuanced than that, and much more considered. But because the episode said Gaza Surf Club, it just got shared straight away. Like, I literally posted it, and within minutes it was just getting shared and shared and shared, and I was like, people cannot have listened to that. So it's pretty obvious that people are sharing it because they're assuming it's going to reflect their own position. That's a bit of a problem, right?
Yeah.
Because
that feels like that's happening kind of everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. And quite a lot of people have come back off that episode and gone, wow, okay. Some people have really liked the fact that it challenged them. Some people have, and to be honest, some people have really, like, been like, thank fuck somebody's actually, this guy, my guest, like, has actually gone to that level of detail so I can understand it. But quite a lot of people didn't like it because they were a bit like, that guy's a dick, and ultimately that comes down to the fact that he's just not reflecting their position in the way that they thought he would. So I think it is tricky. It's a tricky thing to sort of, and I've had that experience loads doing these interviews where, people, I've been challenged, like, in my thinking and in how, like, the Gaza one was a perfect example. I did not agree with a lot of what he said personally, and I still don't. But obviously the job is, as the person with the, like, interviewing, is to try as much as you can not to let your own views influence it, and just listen and give people a platform, or, as you put it, space to explore these ideas. So I've kind of, these days, just, trusted myself on the stories that I want to discuss, really.
We live on a life-giving rock called Earth, hurtling through space. How bonkers is that? You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast.
If you'd like to support the running of the Spaceship Earth podcast, head over to our Substack and sign up. You'll get every episode straight to your inbox, weekly writing, plus other crew offerings. We're grateful for whatever you can give. Join us at becomingcrew.substack.com. So, one of the things I wanted to chat to you about was, I guess my interest, like I say, my interest in surfing, and, I've been a trail runner for my entire life, and I've always had this relationship with the natural world that, it's just somewhere I've just always gravitated to. It's just, for me, I've just always felt more comfortable in places where there's less humans and more
yeah.
nature. That's just how I'm made. And I think my interest in, in action sport, I came late into surfing, sort of mid 30s, but always had a very sort of strong connection with the ocean, and then just got so into it, it just became something. And the running, but I guess what I found over the years is that this, is that these being out on the landscapes, whether it's on mountains or rivers, or in some ways with all of the kind of destruction that's going on, whether it's climate, ecological issues that are coming out as left, right and centre. But for me, always it's sense that, people are out on the landscapes, and you get the same with people that are growing food and whatever, you're in it. So you kind of, in some ways, you experience both the sort of the joy and the possibility and the connection of these places, but you also tend to see and sense and hear and feel the issues.
I'm not sure everybody does that.
Right. So I was talking about me.
Yeah, yeah.
But so what I guess what I was interested in.
I think everybody thinks they do.
But have you not? Because what I've noticed is that originally I can see it coming up a little bit in your early conversations.
Yeah.
You'd have you'd have people that are that's just the way they are.
Yeah.
But I was just looking at this, in your California book that you did.
Yeah.
It's can't remember, is it Corey Schumacher?
Corey Schumacher, yeah.
Yeah, and she says,
extraordinary
I think
woman.
the surf industry has done a really powerful job at crafting a narrative of hedonism and escapism, but participating with the ocean is actually a political act, especially given the fact that the majority of the effects of climate change are actually felt in the ocean.
Yeah.
And so this stuff's
She's a really
obviously
extraordinary woman, Corey.
Yeah, and it's catching up. I mean, I guess I was interested in is like, so I would see this stuff coming up in your episodes, but it seemed to be like it was, to your point, it was only a few people that were really sort of noticing this stuff. But I'm sensing now that's accelerating. It seems.
Well, I think I'm learning more, and I guess I'm formulating my own viewpoints more on that. So, my friend Rebecca Olive, who I've had on the podcast, who'd be a really brilliant guest for you, actually. She is an Australian academic, and she's really interested on this, what she calls like the transactional relationship that we have with nature, and it's one of the reasons why I was so fascinated last year with the lack of attendance at a water protest we had in Brighton, which I really did harp on about on the podcast.
I remember seeing that,
and I did harp on about that on Instagram as well. And what I just found like really fascinating about that was, so in Brighton, I think it's 280,000 people in Brighton, and in my surf community there that I'm lucky enough to be a part of, I'd say there's got to be 200 regular committed surfers, swimmers, paddleboarders, thousands. So there was a Surfers Against Sewage protest, and there was 100 people there. So I was like, why is that? That's so weird, because like I'm on a WhatsApp group with a load of swimmers, for example, and they're there every Saturday morning, and it's all about their mental health. It's all about their, they would say they have a very like three-dimensional relationship with nature, but when the opportunity came to actually turn up and do something, there wasn't many people there. So I just was like, so what is going on there? Like, what is going on there? Like, there's literally shit in the sea. Yeah. Like where we're swimming and surfing, people are getting ill. I mean, this is obviously everyone knows this. Like, I don't need to go into that. Like, but isn't that interesting? Like why? So then we had another one in January where I was a bit like, actually, I'm just going to really tell everyone like about this. So I was on our WhatsApp groups, right? There's this thing happening, there's this event. It was a little bit better attended, but like maybe 10 surfers there from Brighton, maybe 10 of the swimmers in a town of like 300,000 with thousands strong communities that are using and I think it's quite, my friend Rebecca, like her whole thing is people think that they have a three-dimensional relationship, but really the way that they view nature is, what does it do for me? Does it improve my mental health? Does it's
extractive in some ways.
Well, it's consumerist. It's self-centered, and
it's not relational.
It's not like seeing yourself as part of an ecosystem. It's seeing it as another resource at the end of the day, albeit a repository for your mental health, which is obviously a very positive thing, So I think that's a really interesting thing for me, and the same with the wider climate conversation generally. I just put a thing up, a blog. I was just in the French Alps.
Yeah, that's all.
And I've got a load of friends who live in a little town called Beauzel, and they are talking about putting a lift in from Beauzel to Courchevel. And I went out riding with one friend, and he was like, "Oh, brilliant! This is going to be brilliant," And then I went out riding with another friend, and he's like, "Oh my god, it's going to kill the town." I was like, "Well, ain't that interesting?" Again, here you got like two people who would say that they are very committed, climate conscious people. So I got them to do a bit of a Guardian dining over the divide, like dear Chris, dear Gav, like, because it's obviously a metaphor for climate change. It's a metaphor for like how we are going to approach these issues. And it was extremely fascinating, because ultimately it just came down to, again, like, on the one hand, we need to basically get away from capitalism. On the other hand, like, I believe in climate change, but I'm not really prepared to give anything up when it comes down to it, And again, it's just interesting, isn't it? So that's the stuff I just personally am really interested in, because it's like, it's human nature. There are collective blind spots, aren't they? Really, and that's interesting stuff, isn't it? So I think, to answer your question, the more I get fascinated by an idea like that, well, the more I learn about an idea, which is what's going on, because I'm just learning as well. Yeah. Then it's just a really amazing, it's an amazing vehicle through which to explore those things.
Yeah. No, it is. I mean, because for me, I guess that's this relationship with this living earth, we call nature, or for me, this is the sort of fundamental crisis challenge that I see that's sitting at the heart of kind of everything right now. It's a kind of relationship. We talk about this story of separation, that we've sort of seen ourselves as separate from this, everything that isn't human is a kind of, so we've seen it as resource and space for us to do what we want. And this idea that that's just how things are. And it's for many of us in kind of West, because it's kind of quite a westernized cultural view of the natural world.
Yeah, I mean, look at something, sorry to jump in, but on that point, look at something like snowboarding.
Yeah.
I mean, so one of the arguments that was made about the Beauzel thing was one of the friend of mine was like, I want our kids to have the same opportunities that we have, like to go snowboarding. And I was just like, isn't that hilarious? Like, this idea that like that's a God-given right.
Yeah.
And that, the idea that you could go snowboarding as part of your, I'm inverting the commas, is like literally 20 years old. Like it, it's not, it didn't get handed out to you at birth. Like that's not, but again, it's almost like, the old politics, like the Overton window, isn't it? Of what's required for us to have happy lives. You know? Like, is, as you say, as with the extractive society that we live in, like it's just shifting more and more and more, isn't it? And the levels of consumption that we're used to and the levels of experience that gives us is at quite an extreme end, I think. Now, like, and to be like, well, that's my God, like my kids should be able to go snowboarding. Like that'd be outrageous if they could. It's like, well, really, that might be a trade-off at some point. Yeah, but it's I mean, and this is, it can be very overwhelming when you start to look at this stuff, because you start to understand, what you're speaking to. These are all very, very recent scenarios for us to be able to do these things, and in the numbers that do them, right? I mean, to have that kind of access and availability, and the idea that you can, pop in a vehicle or a plane or whatever. And I mean, the cheap flight thing, perfect example.
And so we've sort of built this stuff up, and of course it's created, this is why we're in such a mess, because we're building lives out of it, and businesses and economies, and everything's entangled in a kind of way of perceiving the earth as this thing for humans to have fun with, really, and sort of do what they need to do.
It is there to provide us with a lifestyle.
Right. And it's like,
you laugh,
the Earth's
but I mean,
like
that is
4.5 billion years old.
That is kind of, you laugh, but that is...
No, I mean, I'm not.
That is capitalism's argument, isn't it?
I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing.
No, I know you're not, but it is like it kind of is that, isn't it? Like that is that is capitalism's argument at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Like we should and can use this stuff to do what we want. I mean, manifest destiny.
Yeah.
Literally the argument.
Well, and it's also this sense of like we've the world has kind of stopped being the world. It's kind of like now it's like it's here for humans to do what they want now. It's a sort of a sense that that there's nothing more to come from this earth. It's often how I see sort of the way we're sort of effectively programmed to see ourselves on this earth. But it's kind of like, well, there's 4.5 billion years of like R&D going on, and that's going to keep going. And I think the Earth's got other plans for like how it might want to be, shifting and changing as we sort of disrupt the operating system, which is kind of what we're doing. We're sort of disrupting this operating system that's very, very complex beyond what we can sort of imagine. And so I was kind of like, I guess I've seen this shift, and I guess on this point, part of me, I'm constantly looking at thinking, what's going to happen this year? Like, where are these big shifts going to come from? These people talk about system changes, and I know that you, through your inquiry, I look at things again. There's always there are so many things on the ground that are kind of trying to speak to these things. I mean, what's coming out, like Protect Our Winters, for example, just popped up as an example.
Sure.
These things are real, and there are people within these scenes and industries that understand the kind of the urgency that where this stuff's going to go, like your thing on the ski lift. So it's so interesting when you think again that part of the logic that says, but I want it for my for the next generation, and part of it's like, well, if the snow goes, which it's starting to happen already, or there is no there's no predictability left in the climate, these kind of sectors are going to fall apart, aren't they? So it's sort of like, I don't know. So I look at, and I know you can't look at this whole outdoor community as a whole because it's there's too much in it and going on. But what's your sense moving into this year? How you've noticed things changing over the years through the conversations that you have, through the industry stuff that you see going on? Do you think like there is a kind of like we're reaching tipping point for this in terms of this real understanding of the real sort of scale of the problem?
No, I don't think it's in the slightest. No, I think it's a really long road. I think it's hard to articulate. I think it. Yeah, again, I think there's a gap between. I don't want to be disparaging about something like Protect Our Winters because a lot of dear friends work for the organisation, but I think they're a good example. Like, I think I would actually really question like what impact they have, to be totally frank. Like, and I think that like the people that work there obviously are extremely passionate and like really probably feel like they're making an impact. I kind of look at that across a lot of that activity that you see around this conversation, really. I think it's really great that people are engaging with it, and that there are these organisations, for example, are vehicles to have these conversations and to think about it. But I don't think people are kicking the tires hard enough. Personally, I think again, if you look at what I described as like the pace of the debate and then where the debate might be in our world, I think there's a pretty big gap, and I feel like there's room to fill that gap with a bit more inquiry, a bit more challenge, and to kick the tires a bit harder and say, I interviewed a guy called Erinch Sahan, another person who'd be brilliant for you. He's like one of the leads at Donut Economics Action Lab. Mm-hmm. He referred to it as the purpose industry, and I know what he means. Like he was a bit like, well, this whole purpose industry where people are basically these days making a living out of like having conversations about this stuff that don't ever lead anywhere, and they go at the same events and they have the same conversations and it's the same people, and no one's really standing back and saying like, is that actually working? Just doing anything? Is this achieving anything other than making us all like feel like we're doing the work? Like, and I think there's something in that personally. So I feel like there's a long way to go. I especially in our world.
So on that, like, who is, you've got a history of working closely with a few different organisations. Patagonia would be one, right? You produced that your Type 2 series with them, you're doing other work with them, and you've done it, and obviously they're always quoted as, seen as the outdoor brand that's been the kind of
the exemplar of this thing,
because they've been speaking to it since their existence really was born around that questioning. So I mean, we could maybe we could speak a bit about I'm doing a project for them at the minute, a documentary series which is called The Announcement. So Type 2 finished. So I was really lucky with Patagonia. So like they liked looking sideways, and about 6 years ago they were like, do you want to, let's do something. They actually asked originally if they could sponsor it, but I don't do sponsorship or ads. So I was like, well, let's make something that would be better. So we ended up with Type 2, long story short, which is great, which ran for like 30 episodes. And then about end of 2022, they were like, right, let's park that, because it was, 4 years in, it kind of run its course. And then they were like, do you want to do another project? And I've always wanted to make a pretty involved audio documentary for personal creative reasons. I've always like really thought it'd be really good to sort of challenge myself and do something that's a bit harder, So I said, well, I've always wanted to do a documentary, and they were like, got any ideas? Like, no, not really. And then I went to Ventura to sort of see our mutual friend Alex, and to try and come up with an idea, really. And then when I was there, everyone was referring to Yvonne Chenard's decision to give the company away as The Announcement. That's all they kept saying about it. And I was like, it should be about that. So it's called The Announcement. It's a 3-part series about that, which I've been working on for a year now. And that it's really interesting, because I think ultimately what I've realised is that's what it's about, this whole conversation that we're having here. Like, what does effective work actually look like within a capitalist context? I didn't really realise that's what it was about when I started making it. A decaying capitalist context. I don't.
Well, I mean, perhaps, but a lot of the organisation, Patagonia's contention with The Announcement is that they are, and this is a direct quote, retooling capitalism. That one of their, the premise for it was, are they? That was the start, really. So that's what it's about. And I think ultimately, where they, where the reason they're held up as these, I use the word exemplars, I think it's fair enough. Like, it's interesting that you said that was the genesis of them as a company, because it actually wasn't. Like, one of the things that I've kind of learned from doing this is, like, it's pretty recent, their history of corporate activism, and even the people that work there think it is, like, was baked in 50 years ago. It wasn't. Like, it was recent, and it's been like the last 20 years where it's become this thing as their, as the same way this conversation has evolved. And ultimately what they are trying to do is, it's just a different idea at the end of the day. Like, you've used the word extractive a couple of times in this conversation, which is an important word, I think, because in that, capitalism is based upon extracting on multiple levels for shareholder value. That is the point of it, and what they're trying to do is do something slightly different. And I think that is what a lot of donut economics is about. That, it is about, like, John Elkington, triple bottom line, same thing. Like, okay,
it's about limits, really. What
are the limits, and also what can we, with the resource that we're and the wealth that we're creating. Let's ask a simple question: what else could we use it for? And so I think that's for me where where the interesting things are happening in this conversation. That's why I feel like some of the organisations that I mentioned earlier, like, that's why I feel like they don't really go far enough with what they're doing in terms of, like, how do we help people also think about this? And that's what that's hopefully what this series is about. Like, it's about, giving people, again, like, the space to ask themselves that question, and within the context of that Patagonia conversation, and within the context of, like, so that's why I interviewed Imandeep for this, because she's brilliant on that, as you might imagine. She's absolutely, I mean, if she referred, I referred to the purpose industry, she referred to the industrial philanthropic complex. And that's the chat, for again, if you bring it back to our world, when the Patagonia announcement was made, perfect example, social media, just blanket initially anyway, because there was scrutiny of it, which I do look at in the series, but initially it was just, again, like people posting the Gaza thing without kicking the tires, like hooray, Yvonne Chouinard, what a hero, like brilliant, like not really, like, well, what actually is this, like what's he gonna do, so if someone like him on Deep is brilliant at asking those questions, is like, okay, well, let's look at this and like let's think about, is this good? Where does it sit in the history of corporate philanthropy? Where does it sit in the history of capitalism? And does their, do the collars match the cuffs? Like, are their intentions actually real? And I think the more we can all have those kind of interrogations, and that for me, that's what's interesting, and that's kind of the stuff I'm interested in looking at, really.
There are two stories on Spaceship Earth, a passenger story and a crew story. The passenger story is based on extraction, transaction and distraction, and it's leading us towards collapse. The crew story is based on connection, cooperation and participation. It leads towards regeneration.
You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast with my dad, Dan Burgess.
Yeah, I guess I think where I sit with a lot of this is that there's, you can skirt around it, which is what we've tended to have done for a long time, and you can sort of you can kind of just sort of tinker on the edges, which is what we've been doing for way too long.
You can go to a climate event,
right? You can tinker. Or you can really lift the lid up.
Yeah, and you can ask yourself a few difficult questions. Yeah.
And I would say we're moving into a time, where we're alive on this earth, where we're going to have to begin to get used to really opening up and getting used to holding these really difficult questions.
Yeah.
And not reverting to what you were speaking to, the binariness at the start. We've got to get good.
Should we build this lift?
Right.
Is this a good idea?
Right.
What's this going to do to our community?
Right.
Is this like, what's the point of this?
Right.
Not just like, hooray, they're going to build a lift, my house price is going to go up. Exactly. That's why that's an interesting metaphor, isn't it?
Yeah.
Same thing.
Yeah. I guess what what one way of doing that, which is, again, doesn't quite fit into the current logic, is you involve more people in those discussions, more people in those conversations, not less, and more people that represent different parts of that system, many of whom you might find quite challenging. But so that's otherwise we risk just repeating that problem. And I think the thing with business and the way, anyway, you look at it is, at least, again, this is how I experience it in my interactions with business and what I see the people who are working within the systems, and is that there is still businesses have grown and are growing, and still, their whole logic, their whole way of being is built on those, on those principles of growth and profit and shareholders. And a business has more rights than a forest or a river. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like, I could set up a business this afternoon in half an hour and it would have more rights than this 200-year-old ash tree. Right, Simon, you know what I mean? It's like, that's insane. But we created that. And
also, but also, it's recent.
That's what I mean. And it's a human construct. It's not
it's not inevitable. That's the other thing I find really interesting about the conversation around capitalism. I will say that documentary that I'm making is about capitalism. Yeah. So it's not. It is examining this whole question through the prism of capitalism. It's not about like system change, which is, I think, an entirely different conversation. But capitalism is recent. It's only 200 years old, 300 years old. And this idea that there's an inevitability to this, I think, is also quite interesting, because, again, with this lift debate, a couple of people were chipping in like, well, I'm not that okay with capitalism. And a few people were like, well, what's the alternative? As if like from the dawn of time, like shareholders were roaming the earth. Like it's just not true. Like, you know, it's like, again, like the water system, like it isn't inevitable that our water systems are owned by huge corporations and that are pumping shit into our rivers. That happened because humans made decisions like not that long ago, and those decisions they're at least worth questioning. You know, I'm not going to say like we should reverse them, like, but we should question them. And it's the same with capitalism. It's the same with what you've just talked about. Like people like Kate Rayworth, people like Eringe, Imandeep, they're just asking questions. They're just like, is this the best thing that we should be doing? And I feel like there's that's important, you know.
It is, and I would only just add that for me, yes, capitalism is a thing, but I would say that it's changed almost. It's so pervasive and deeply ingrained in people that it's shifted how we are as people. So it might still be an idea, but even to your point, you know, like who turns up on the protests, all these people that, for me, is something. There's almost a sort of a slight capitalist sort of impact of how what we decide I can be asked to do, or what responsibility, where my responsibility stops.
Well, there's a really so on that, like if on one of my right leaning friends on the surf WhatsApp group, I mean, he was like proper goading me. You know, he was like sending me pictures of like Swampy, you know, and remember that guy?
Yeah, of course. He was my hero.
Yeah, right. And he was like, he was sending me pictures of like Tim Martin from Wetherspoons. And he was replying like, sorry lads, can't make it, I've got lunch at Wetherspoons. Basically, he was saying, I let swim in shit to own the libs, you know?
Yeah.
And I was just a bit like, isn't that mad?
Yeah.
You know, that like, his desire to make an ideological point, which I think is related to what you're saying, was again more important to him than actually the very fact that the week before I'd been surfing with him in shit.
Yeah.
That by any measure is quite fucked up, I think, and at least worthy of interest. You know, again, it's interesting.
Yeah, it is. And you know, I had a conversation on which I say, I think all of this stuff is entangled, which is why I do think it's you know, that's not just me. I guess there's a whole kind of body of work that says that, you know, the kind of shifts we're going to need to try and make with these systems is going to be deeply personal, because we're so caught up in them. You know, when we talk of capitalism, all we talk about things, but actually, you know, we've been shaped by, particularly over, you know, go back to the last 30 years, the phones, everything, you know, we can still sort of remember a slightly different culture.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? But, you know, now we're so entangled with this extractive system, you know, that's playing out in what, you know, in our privilege and our entitlements and what we believe we should have. And so it's quite a sort of messy journey. And for me, that's where the natural world comes in, actually. It's this, like, there's something here about how we might start to work our way back into a different way of showing up. But just before let's just on the Patagonia, on this, it sounds fascinating, and obviously it's coming out. When will it come out?
I don't know. I've got to finish it. I've nearly finished it. Yeah, I've it's 3 episodes. They're 45 each. I've done the first 2, and I'm about 35 minutes into the third,
right?
Like, as in writing it.
Yeah.
And then I got to record. I've recorded the first 2, and then I'm working with, do you know CJ Mera? Do you know that guy?
Yeah.
He's doing the soundtrack.
Amazing.
So then I'm working with a very close friend, Ben Townsend, who is helping me produce it, and then we're going to work with John, CJ, to put the soundtrack together, and then I'll send it to Patagonia and see what they think.
But it's kind of like, I guess I was just curious in, you know, what I've always, at least, you know, have found with Patagonia, who, you know, I've been a massive fan of for years, and always, again, you know, I appreciate the tensions and the complexities of what they're doing, but generally speaking, I've found them always to be pretty good at, like, generous, actually, at giving learning away.
Oh,
you know,
definitely.
That's kind of at the heart.
I mean, I can't speak highly enough about that. You know, like the room they've given me with this project is a true privilege. They literally just left me alone for a year, and that, you know, it's a really fortunate position that to be in, to just, because, you know, I've been going to them like, do you think we should put a deadline on this? They're like, nah, just let us know when you finished it, you know. And also, like, it's going to be challenging, I think. Like, it's not a whitewash, as you probably gathered. You know, it's not. I'd no intention of like doing some puff piece about how brilliant that thing was. Like, I wanted to, and I'm assuming they realised that because I've worked with them for 5 years and know who I am and what I do. So, like, you know, so, but to your point about that, yeah, I believe that, and I do believe they put the money where the mouth is. You know, in an imperfect system, I think they are definitely, and that's the conclusion of it. The conclusion of it is positive, because it's at least an idea, and it's at least an attempt to do something different. And as you say, whether that's on the personal level, which is obviously what I'm getting at with like, let's ask more questions essentially, or whether it's on the business level, they are trying to do something different. You might think it's full of holes. You might think that, I mean, I do deal with the tax dodge stuff, which is, I think, quite easy to sort of demolish, really. But they're trying to do something in the way that a lot of companies are right now, and I think that speaks to generosity, that they give it away. They're happy to do. Look at you, Lex. They basically develop that, you know, and have given that platform to other companies like Finisterre to then take that. That's a pretty open source thing they did there, you know, and that's kind of big part of their approach, which is why and that's what people perceive about them, isn't it? You know.
Yeah, and I mean, and again, sort of going back, it makes sense, you know, if we're going to shift to these different types of systems, which are, I think, all the models that and people you've referenced. Again, it's all seeing living systems, seeing ecologies of organisations, and how you play to your strengths. So their strength is they have that scale of learning, and you know, they're able to kind of implement things, and they've done a lot of the hard work. So
well, they're as this metaphor we've been using in this conversation, they're at the leading edge in our world. You know, with where that debate is, and again, that has value.
Yeah, no, that's good. So, and if you was there stuff that you have been surprised by in that exploration? Are you like, wow, I had no idea that, you know, has it been everything you've discovered making this doc has been kind of, that's kind of what I thought, or have you had some surprises?
Well, like I say, the main surprise is understand what it's actually about, you know, which was really enjoyable as a creative thing. I'm going to use the word journey then. It was that was great, because I didn't really know what it was about, and I started from the premise of like, let's understand this, and let's and it went from there. So I've learned a load, you know, from doing that. Did I find anything? I mean, there's a whole strand about corporate philanthropy and the cynicism around. Cynicism is the wrong word. Like the skepticism around corporate philanthropy, because obviously corporate philanthropy is only made possible by extractive capitalism. So there's a fairly glaring contradiction at the heart of that. And you know, when you look back on the history of that in the 19th century with your Carnegies and your British reference points, you know, it doesn't look great at this remove. Like really, like obviously their intentions were good in the end, but it was really about creating more shareholder value at the end of the day, and you know, using that immense wealth that was created to do good. But that wealth only existed because of the extractive nature of the work they were doing. So like that was an important thing, whether you realize it or not. What Patagonia have done has to be told in the context of that story. It just does, because what they're doing is corporate philanthropy. It's a modern version of it. And it's positioned really effectively and really interestingly, and I believe that their intentions are really good, and I believe that the way that they're disseminating that money is pretty kosher, you know, but it has to be understood in that context. So for me, like, exploring that was fascinating, you know. And
have you come across hold on, have you come across
no, I did see this though,
because that is
post-capitalist philanthropy. Yeah. And I saw this when I walked in. I was like, "Fuck, I should have read this." No,
well, this is actually they're coming on the pod next month. These two. But I think as you're talking, this is what this book. A lot of this is about. Is again this, like, when you look at the structures of philanthropy over the years and how they have formed on the back of capitalism, and And of course, where the money's coming from and what has happened for that money to be created, and then where it gets channeled and who makes those decisions.
Yeah.
And
also huge, who makes decisions, the opacity, opacity, I don't know how to say that word, but like, the opaque nature of that decision making is also like a really, I was fortunate enough to interview a guy called Marcus Lux, who runs the Robert Bosch Foundation in Germany, which is an equivalent to the Holdfast Collective, really. Which is Patagonia's non-profit, which will disseminate these profits. And he was that foundation's been going 60 years. And he was like, well, at the end of the day, like, we're a load of old white men making decisions. There's not a lot of accountability in this, like, and that's clearly a problem. But back to what else have I learned? Like, just contextualizing it within these different conversations. Another key theme of it is like, public versus private. Like, really, what's going to pay for the shift? Is it, and the answer would appear to be not philanthropy, not private. It will have to be public. There's a fascinating stat from this guy Marcus from the Bosch Foundation, who told me that they're the main philanthropic contributor to the German education system. And he was basically saying, if you took all the private philanthropic contributions to the German education system and tried to run the German education system, it would be operational for 45 minutes of one day.
Yeah, right.
Which gives you So Patagonia's 100 million a year, albeit that is a great thing, but it is symbolic. It isn't actually going to move the needle that much when it comes down to it, because these huge, it will take public money, which is another really interesting theme, which I didn't really know a lot about. Another interesting theme is, how democratic is corporate philanthropy as well on the scale. Because again, if you agree with the causes being espoused, it's great, isn't it? But if it's like Barry Side, a right wing guy who's done a very similar thing to Patagonia in the last 2 years, set up a very similar structure, but he's doing it for pretty nefarious right wing reasons, as I would consider them. He's getting heavily criticised, but that's only because you don't agree with the politics. It's the same vehicle. So again, that's a nuanced point. So I've really enjoyed like looking at it in the context. These are the themes. This is basically what it's about.
Amazing. Gosh, I look forward to digging into that one. I was trying to remember certain conversations that stuck out for me over the years, because I say in the last couple I've listened to less of your podcast in the last couple of years. The first few years I was listening to absolutely everything, and that's just me. That's more been me being stretched into so many. That's things.
How it goes.
It is.
That's how it is with podcasts.
It is, and then you see something. I see you've done a certain conversation. I need to listen to that.
Yeah.
But I was reminded by, I was looking through like the snowboarder Kimi, and that whole discussion on cancer, which I found it was connecting with it was very pertinent to our family. But it was those kind of how do those land, those kind of conversations when you do them? Like, how do you find them?
How do I find them?
Yeah, and then how do they land once you?
Well, just a conversation like that, I just thought was a total privilege. I mean, she's an extraordinary woman, and I know her fairly well. I think that probably came across. And when I asked her to do it, she was up for it, and she was really trusting. I think she was really vulnerable. That's who she is, though. She's comfortable with that. So I just thought it was a privilege.
When I'm standing on top of those mountains, I know exactly where I'm going. I have control over my snowboard, and sure, things can still happen, accidents can still happen, but I'm so conditioned to know. I visualize how I'm going to make it down these huge mountains, and I'm going to get up them. I know the course. And so when this diagnosis happened for me, I'll say, because it really did bring a whole different kind of perspective to my life, I realized that everything that I thought about breast cancer was not necessarily accurate.
Like, first and foremost, like, you'll probably recognize this from doing them. They are personal experiences, these conversations, aren't they? And you kind of judge them, I think, in two ways, don't you? You judge them from like the experience you had as a human having that conversation, which is a total privilege.
Yeah.
Like, and then it's like, well, how did it land, as you put it? So,
I guess it's a big question, but I guess when you think of, the journey you've been on with the podcast, where we are, 2024, all kinds of shite going on everywhere. Where do you see, what's the role of the podcast in these times?
That's a big question, isn't it?
That one just fell out. I don't know where it came from, but it's like,
well, I mean,
it's one I'm asking myself.
I think you've kind of, I think for me, like I said, a space to ask difficult questions and I mean, like, I'm a journalist, so for me, it's always about, like, is this an interesting story? And like I said earlier, the lens is like, do I find this an interesting story, which is incredibly privileged, but it's still that, really. So, but again, as my own interest, I think, has probably become quite clear from this conversation, my interests have definitely evolved over this, which has been, again, a hugely gratifying part of it. That's kind of why I do it, and that's why I want to keep doing it, and that's what I think the sort of point of it is these days.
Yeah, wow. Amazing. One of the things, obviously on the Spaceship Earth, we always explore the this story of passenger versus crew, and kind of asking this question at the moment, which again, I guess we've moving around, but like, what does this idea of becoming crew in this moment, what comes up for you, Matt? What comes up in your...
Well, I guess I think back to the little thread we had around, what you might call the transactional 3 versus 3-dimensional, just being in, like, awareness of your impact. And I don't mean in the, I don't mean in the, like, I need to take my cup to the coffee shop, or obviously I don't
use the plastic straw.
Yeah, it's all fine, isn't it? But again, like, what does that actually do?
Yeah.
We should be aware that we're crew for a start. That'd be a start. And what is our role as in that context, and how can we, like, just stand back a little bit and think about what that role might be? That's how I would see it.
Yeah, no, I like that. And in the spirit of that, I guess, and as someone that, you do a lot, but always curious what might you invite our listeners to consider? Or it could be a little invitation to play with something, or to notice something, but just something that actually you can offer listeners as a little invitation to take away with them.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reading thing is really interesting. I think I post what I read on Instagram, which
you're a big reader, right?
Yeah,
it's a big thing for you.
Yeah, they really are. Yeah, to the point that if I don't read, I feel like I don't really feel like myself. But I think that's just because I grew up as a proper little bookworm, and it was always important to me. And I quite often get asked, how do you read so much? And
turn my phone off.
Yeah, that would literally be it. I think obviously that relationship we've got with that little thing is definitely worth, again, interrogating, isn't it? A little bit. I mean, I'm terrible. Like, I'm like everyone. I'm on my phone all the time. But you can turn it off. For me, like, making a conscious effort to read more in the last 4 years has been really good for my mental health and for my understanding of the world, and to kind of seek out, like we've been saying, non-binary viewpoints on these things, because if you get your views from social media, I'm not sure how healthy that is, really, because it, like you said earlier, it's weaponized, isn't it?
Well, I would say, obviously, I will link out to everything you do, but I just say, yeah, Matt, I'm a big fan, and thank you for taking
thanks,
the time.
Dan. I really appreciate, like I said, how all your kind words today. It was really, it's nice when you feel seen, isn't it?
It is, because I also know that it's, I don't want to use that language of extraction, but I've received a lot from your podcast, from the conversations you've had over the years, and I also recognise, like, the effort that it takes to produce those things. So I think there is there's a whole nother episode here, but I often, again, maybe that's the capitalist piece, but I often sense that we have a culture that has a lot of expectation over access to things, content particularly, you know.
Yeah.
But I know the work that goes into making these things happen, and I know that I have received a lot through those conversations. So I just wanted to say, thank you for that and what you do. You are, you know, it's been amazing watching your pod develop and the community around it. And like I say, I think the conversations you have sometimes, you know, as early as whether you're in either that was your intention or not, I think you're opening stuff up in really vital ways. So
thank you.
Thank you for what you do.
Yeah, thanks, man. Well, thanks for having me. Much appreciated.
Pleasure. See you soon. So I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Matt. I hope it, provoked some thought. Do check out Looking Sideways. Look out for the launch of the announcement, the 3-part doc with Patagonia. As ever, if this speaks to you, please do share it with a friend or on your socials. Let us know what it's bringing up for you. Get in touch, hello@thespaceship.earth, or drop a comment on the Substack. Please, if you can, subscribe to the podcast. The podcast does remain free, but the best way to support us is to go to becomingcrew.substack.com and subscribe. That way you'll get every episode into your inbox. And like I said, if you're up for a pint of podcast once a month, we'd be so grateful for your support. You can find all of that at becomingcrew.substack.com. Okay, that's it for now. Look after yourselves out there, and until next time, peace and out.
This podcast is created in service to life, for you. It takes time, funds and energy to make. If you'd like to contribute to the running costs, you can donate the price of a cuppa or a pint. Find the link on our website. This podcast wouldn't exist without the following crew: Charlie Shred, Audio Jedi; Seaman Home Burgess, Engine Room; Willow Burgess, Jingles;